Hi, everyone. My name is Jehan Luth. I am a part of DLC's BFSI committee at the New York City chapter. I'm excited to be a part of this organization in New York City and more excited to, I guess, give a little bit of information on my background. I have a really unconventional background, which you can probably see in my profile. It starts in India, goes through quite a few different pit stops in life, and takes the most current pit stop in New York City. But let me start all the way back. So I was born in Nashik. Nashik is a small town outside of Mumbai in India. Really early on, I was shipped to boarding school, and I was primarily had two very distinctive parts of my life. There was sports, and there was academics. And in sports, there was a long list of everything my parents sent me to. So I did competitive swimming, competitive shooting, competitive badminton. You can go down the list, competitive golf. And in academics, there was also a really high bar. And so, was lucky enough to pursue a really interesting set of courses, primarily around computer science. And so, as I finished high school, I was faced with a really interesting choice and question, which was, what do I do next? And one of the things I decided to pursue was I was always really, really passionate about food. And so I left Nashik. I went to the Culinary Institute of America in New York and pursued a bachelor's in culinary science. It's similar to a food science course. But one of the really important tenets that drove me there was always a curiosity behind how can we use a lot of data, or in this case, food, to keep people healthy and safe. And with that theme, food seemed to be like the first starting point in my journey of how can we use food to keep people healthy and safe. So go to the CIA. Um, I was very, very fascinated by food, and I think more fascinated by the fine dining space. So I took during my CIA tenure, spent about a year where I took a gap and worked for some incredible restaurants in New York City. One of them being Per Se, a wonderful restaurant run by Chef Thomas Keller. Um, Learned the sheer appreciation for fine dining, but also realized it is not something I can see myself doing for a really long time. Um, and so I went back to culinary school, finished my culinary science degree, and started working for one of the largest CPG companies in the US called Campbell Soup Company. And at Campbell Soup, with a background in computer science and a culinary background, I was lucky enough to be a part of the R&D teams. And actually, there's quite a few products that I helped co-create that are on shelves in grocery stores in the US. But one of the things I was doing at Campbell's was really working with a lot of data and data being gathered on what do people want to eat and how can we create products to serve these people. And it really started, this was a while back, and they were starting to see themes around people wanted healthy, more nutritious food. And, we at Campbell's were doing quite a bit to power that. But healthy and nutrition, I felt like I didn't understand those two words. I didn't understand what healthy and nutritious meant because there's a lot of anecdotal information that what you think is healthy might be a little different than what I think is healthy. So I started going deeper in academics, and I went back to school. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania Medical School and got a master's in public health, specifically in epidemiology. And I also, while I was at Penn, I also got another degree, which is a master's in law, focused primarily around privacy and data privacy law. Because one of the most fascinating things I faced at Campbell's was, in order to know what we should be creating, we need a lot of data about what people are eating. And how can you take a lot of data about what people are eating in a way that protects their privacy? because I really don't want to know what you're eating. I want to know what the population's eating. And epidemiology and privacy laws seemed like a really, really good combination, which I'm still grateful for. Once I was a part of the medical school with a food background and a data science background, you can imagine the numerous places I was thrown into. And some of the more interesting spaces I was thrown into were medical trials, clinical trials, where researchers were trying to understand what people are eating. You can kind of follow the theme. That was the same thing at Campbell Soup as well, right? We needed data on what people are eating. And at the medical school, what we resulted on was a lot of people, we recruited a lot of people, paid them, and told them to take pictures of every paper receipt. And once they took a picture of that paper receipt of everywhere they eat and their grocery store, we then pulled that data in, codified those receipts, and really started to build a better understanding of what people are eating and tie them to, really complicated clinical outcomes like Alzheimer's and cancer. The problem with getting people to take pictures of paper receipts, it's a really, really broken process. And we needed a lot of data to kind of figure out what people are eating at scale. And so fast forward after that point, with a really unconventional background, but the common theme being needing data to better understand what people are consuming, realize that there is no source out there for data like what we needed. So I actually took a pretty big jump into being an entrepreneur, founded a company called Banyan a few years back, with the core premise that there's a lot of applications that need really, really granular data, but there's no infrastructure to pull that data out. So Banyan builds the data pipes, if you may, to bring receipt data to consumers in any application they choose. And it's been an incredibly exciting journey. But let me pause there for a second and kind of give another really similar time shot of what else was going on in my life during that point. So all of this is all happening professionally, but personally, as I told you early on, back in Nashik, there were two parts of my life. There was academics and there was sports. And so while everything I shared was happening professionally, being a competitive athlete for many, many years in many sports, I couldn't let that go. And so I actually took on quite a few really interesting challenges, which forced me to stay healthy, stay in shape. So really, during my days at Campbell's, as an example, I competed in a lot of golf leagues in the U.S. Actually, won a few of them, which was quite exciting. After my days at Campbell's, when I was in medical school, I started to pick up triathlon, and I started to do triathlons in New Jersey and New York and Maryland. And these triathlons started off small, right? These are half Olympic triathlons, so few 100-meter swim, 40-kilometer, 20 to 40-kilometer bicycle ride, and then a 10K run. Being really competitive, I started to do fairly well in these, but I needed more, and so I took on the Ironman challenge. I started with a couple half Ironmans, and I did my first half Ironman in Atlantic City in New Jersey, which is quite a interesting task to take on, because it is, as many people that have done Ironmans will say, the first 2 minutes and last 2 minutes are fun, and everything in the middle is really painful. And so the half Ironman is about a kilometer-ish swim with about 60-ish kilometers in a bicycle ride, and then half marathon. A lot of fun. And I was scheduled for my next half Ironman in North Carolina 3 weeks from then, when a hurricane actually, unfortunately, hit the place we were racing, and they had to cancel the race. And so the race folks sent me an email saying, here are 10 other races you can go for, and the 9 of the 10 races were other half Ironmans across the country. And one of them was a full Ironman Florida, a week later. And so, being the person I am, I chose the full Ironman, and a week later showed up in Florida with a race significantly longer than anything I've done, almost a 1.8 mile swim, so significantly longer swim. I actually don't remember how long the swim is. 120-ish mile bike ride, and I'm actually blanking on the numbers. I know it ends with a full marathon, which is the really, really painful part. Anyways, it wasn't the best time I ever had, but I definitely completed the race in fairly decent fashion during a full-blown thunderstorm, which was a lot of fun. Long-winded way of saying that as professionally and academically, the rigor was definitely on, because the other part, which is interesting, my timeline of doing all these degrees are fairly condensed. So I did both my master's degrees in a year and a few months. I did my undergrad in a year and 7 months. And so I really sped things up. So in a recreational space, it was pretty much hardcore triathlons. And in academics, it was, let me get through my degrees as fast as I can so that I can really go do my next thing, which was build. At that time, I didn't know, but my next thing would be building Banyan. So anyways, fast forward, end of time at Penn, just completed the Ironmans, just completed my degrees, now found Banyan, which was one of the most exciting, rewarding, but also challenging things to do, because keep in mind, my entire family, blood family, was still back in India, and I had just started dating an incredible woman who I then married, but still fairly new social circle in the US, and starting a company, raising capital, hiring the first few people. How do you start a company? Where do you go? There was a lot of learning from 0 to 1 that needed to happen really fast. And by no means is the journey complete, but I think all the pit stops in my life, professionally, academically, and recreationally, have brought me to this point. So we'll see what the next few years have and the next couple decades have. And I think in all 3 of these facets, I'm going to be pushing quite a bit to stay well balanced in all 3, and always trying to find what's next. So during this time, there were a lot of incredible moments, but I'd be remiss if not to bring up a few not so exciting times, because I think those moments teach a lot more about who people are than the fun ones. There were a few highlights, if I could pick a few. I think the first one being when I was 16 and 8-ish months. That's when I left India to come to the US, pretty much by myself. My sister, she came to drop me, but other than that, it was a backpack. And I showed up with a backpack in a school where there were, I think, a handful of Indian people, not many people that spoke my language, looked like me, talked like me. And so the being dropped halfway across the world, really far from family, and needing to start running from day one was a really, really big, interesting challenge. Many of you can relate. I think another one is always finding the right balance between the 3 facets I spoke about. It's academic, professional, and sports. And in different phases of our lives, other things come in, right? Family comes in, and once you graduate, people stop studying or learning. Um, Once people start having, bigger jobs, they start giving up on health and recreational stuff. And finding that balance is really, really hard. And it oftentimes leads to, um, it leads to a lot of challenges finding the people that really understand and get how to have that balance. So it took me a while. It took me a while to have a circle of friends that really understand that my balance is, three pieces of life. Um, Another piece, which is really not sure which bucket to put it in, but for most people, there's kind of a script that's written, right? You go to undergrad, you do an internship, you go to grad school, you do this, you get a job. And deviating from the script is always challenging because there aren't many stories out there on what does the path, the unknown path look like. And one of the things I'm excited about this organization and DLC is meeting more people that have taken a path unknown. But I'm sure many could agree that path while you're on it is really, really lonely. And not many people can relate to what you're doing. So it is really hard being across the world without people and believing in the vision and what you're trying to solve for, all of which has changed since the last 7-8 years I've been in the US, or 10 years at this point. So the fine balance of pushing forward with the vision and belief while also being humble enough to keep learning, I think is a really hard one to strike well. I think there's one rule I follow pretty much my life with, so it'll hopefully keep things quite simple. And I forget, I have not invented this rule. I forget where I read it. But someone had once said that, you should break your life up into 4, pieces, essentially. So 30% of your time you spend learning, 30% of your time you spend mentoring or teaching or guiding, 30% of your time you spend with people intellectually at a similar wavelength as you in their journey, and then 10% of the time you spend kind of by yourself to really get to know who you are. And for me, I'll speak personally, if one of these 3 buckets goes out of whack and I am talking a lot more and not learning enough, or I'm just learning and not having an opportunity to talk about what I've learned. And by the way, I'm not talking about academics. I do this every day with my job. I have to listen to people, learn from their experiences, and somehow empathize with those experiences, bring them to other people that have not learned from those experiences. And so there's a lot of this happening professionally. It happens in my personal life. I need to learn from people about their journey, share my journey, be with people, and then kind of be with yourself. And I think these 3 facets, especially the share, the learn, and the kind of be, are really, really important to be in harmony. Because with me, when they go out of whack, it's a mess. It's a mess. So I ask everyone close to me to hold me accountable to these 4 buckets. So one of the really interesting questions around, and I know a lot of recent years, there have been a lot of articles or news around, especially the younger generation wanting to work for a company that has a sense of purpose. But oftentimes we forget, what is our sense of purpose as a person? And what are we really trying to solve for 10, 20, 30 years from now? And I think my entire professional academic life, I've always seen a really similar problem, which was the hardest problems to solve. The answer exists. It exists in the data, but the data itself is not available. So fundamentally, democratizing access to really large, copious amounts of data, I feel, will solve some of the biggest problems of the world. And it's not my job to solve, it's my job to hopefully be a part of the solution that enables access. And so there's multiple steps, and I'd be foolish to say I could do it all. I don't think that's the case, but I do think I have a part to play in helping solve some of the biggest challenges. That could be medical, it could be whatever they might be. I feel data has an answer, and I know that sounds really corny for the type of company I'm coming from, but I really do believe that. All right. How important is money in this equation? I think money has the power of solving a lot of big problems in the world. It also has the power to corrupt a lot of people's brains by misusing money, I guess. But the world we live in, capital is a utility. It has to be used well. It has to be used effectively. And I think Jeff Bezos actually said it, even though, take it for what it's worth, but I believe he was on a stage when he said, I own X percentage of Amazon, but I've really created X amount of wealth for other people. And I think that is similar to how I hopefully look at using capital in different ways. And professionally, obviously, Banyan is a company that has raised numerous rounds of capital from investors, and there is a fiduciary responsibility to drive incredible amounts of value to people that have invested in us. But personally speaking, I think capital can be a really, really powerful mode of fuel for change. And there's many, many ways to do that. So that is something I haven't figured out, but I'm confident I will have a better answer in 5-ish years from now, hopefully sooner. People that inspire me. I think there's a few. I think there's a few folks that do so, and it's in really different buckets. Kind of makes sense, hopefully, if you think about my background. But I think from a elite athlete perspective, I pretty much look up to a lot of athletes that are at the best in the game and at the best of what they do. And I think I have a particular affinity towards professional Ironman and Iron women, because it takes a special level of enduring pain to really put your head down and keep pushing. And there's a lot of skills to be learned with the right mindset from elite athletes. Lionel Sanders is a great example, someone I definitely look up to. There's people professionally that have really interesting thoughts, but I think the ability to take those thoughts, articulate it into a business, and then obviously stand that business up and generate insane amount of value for its shareholders, there's examples there as well. And I think one of the best is Steve Jobs, kind of what he did, the intersection of design, business, and innovation. So there's a lot of examples, but I think people that have charted a path, which is off script and that is really different, I look up to quite a bit, because they haven't had a playbook to go off of. And so those are folks I get along with really, really well. Anyways, if you need to reach me, you have my information. Excited to connect. Thank you.